Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Well, today we have a really special video, special to me for certain, but I think a lot of you will enjoy this because I have a very, very special guest on the show today, and this is my mother. And I have been on her for a while about doing this video, and she finally gave in to me. And the reason why I want to have her on here is because although my mother isn't that old, the story of her childhood sounds like something out of the late 1800s. Her family, growing up, they were very poor, and they lived very simple, and even to the point of being primitive by the standards of her childhood. And so I wanted to bring her on here and talk about that and how that they survived living in a way that a lot of us are trying right now and probably will have to do more of in the very near future with all the things that are transpiring in the world. So that's why I wanted to get her on here, and I'm just thankful and excited to be able to do this. Thank you for coming on, Mom. It means a lot to me.
Thank you.
So let's start off of how many kids originally was in your family? So
There's 10 of us.
10 of it. And so that's a big family. You guys were farmers. Where were you farming?
Northern Missouri, but by Kirksville. Iowa line.
Okay, so a lot of you are familiar with that area, some of you aren't. Northern Missouri, that's kind of the flat area. It's a big farmland area. And from the stories you've told, that you had some pretty harsh winters up there too.
Yes, we did.
Okay, so let's go back and talk about how things were. Kind of give us just a general overview of how things were for you as a child on those farms, as compared to what other people were living at that time. Because I think a lot of people, I know I was growing up, when I heard these stories, I just thought that, well, that's how people lived back then. And we're only talking in the 1950s. And then when I start to realize that how most people lived in the 1950s, it was much more modern than how you guys lived. So, right. Like, you had electricity.
We had electricity.
But originally, did you have running water?
Not at some of the places. We didn't. The last place we lived before we moved to Springfield, we didn't have water. We had a well.
Right. And you guys were sharecroppers, right? Right. That's where what Grandpa would do is he would find property that had an old house on it, and he'd work out a deal with the owner to live in the house and help maintain the land. For those of you that don't know what that is. And so there were times you had to draw water from the well.
Yes.
Right. I remember you told me at one point, didn't Grandpa install some kind of indoor pump or something in the house? Yes, the
little pump that goes on the sink.
Right.
They'll pump the water in.
And the story I remember, you bathing. How was bathing in the summer and in the wintertime?
We had the galvanized tubs, and on north end the house was the boys, and the girls on the south side. And we'd fill them up in the mornings, and when the sun come out and would heat it up, then in the late afternoons, we'd take our baths out in the tubs.
What about the wintertime?
Wintertime, it was a tub in the house, in the kitchen, where it was warm. They'd bring that tub in, and we'd all take our baths in the kitchen.
Didn't you say Grandma would put up a sheet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so the boys would be on one side of the sheet and the girls would on the other?
We managed.
Yeah, managed. And you guys, you raised and grew a lot of your food.
Yes, everything. Yes. We had everything.
And how big were your gardens? I mean, you may not remember the exact size, but...
Big. And that's not from a kid's viewpoint. That's from the adults. I mean, they were huge gardens.
Yeah. And you had animals?
We had animals, anything that we could eat.
Yeah. And you guys preserved your own food, canned it, different things like that?
Canned our meat, canned our vegetables, our fruits. And what we didn't can, we'd freeze and dry. We had a smokehouse. Everything we got was from our own farm. It wasn't store-bought. They would go to the store and get staples, different things that, you know, you can't, like vanilla and different things. Sure, more than that, but for the most part, the main meals came off the farm.
Okay. And, you know, you did a lot of treating illnesses. I remember you know, like Grandpa with the animals, he pretty much took care of,
Right.
He had to know how to take care of animals. I remember the story of the lamb that got caught in the fence, if you want to kind of tell that story.
And it had ripped its stomach open, and it was raining, storming that night, and Dad went out to check the animals and came back in carrying that lamb, and it was a mess. And he asked my mom, do you think that we could save it? And Mom said, we can try. So they laid it on the table, and they cleaned it inside and out, and they sewed it up, and it lived for several years. And that's the kind of heart my mom and dad had toward animals and people. You know, if it was worth having, it was worth saving. You know, they just believed in using what you have and take care of what you have.
Yeah, Grandpa, he was the type, he would literally give you the shirt off his back if he felt you needed it. He was that type. He was, you know, in some ways he kind of seemed a little rough around the edges. You know, he was a tough guy. He was an outdoor guy, but he had a heart bigger than he was. And you guys, you know, Grandma and stuff took care of you kids too as much as she could, didn't she?
Yes.
And Grandpa was always, they were always kind of doing natural things as much as possible.
Yeah, Daddy was really into trying to do things himself, whatever he could mix up or fix.
Yeah.
You know, he'd try it. And we seldom went to doctors. If Vicks or coal oil or turpentine or all those kinds of things didn't work, well, we didn't need a doctor.
Yep. And I remember, tell about how you guys, because if you know, you're 10 kids nowadays, you know, if people have 10 kids, most people don't, but some of you might have a lot of kids. But a lot of modern families, you know, they have, you know, several bedrooms in the house, and you guys didn't. You all were living, what was it, the boys pretty much in one room and the girls in another?
At some of the houses, yes.
And remember, tell us the story about, was it in the wintertime and you'd wake up and there'd be snow on your bed?
Mm-hmm. There'd be snow on the foot of my bed, and all the windows had snow in it.
Yep.
And we'd drift in.
The old houses that were so drafty and the winters there. And you literally did walk to school both ways.
Yes, we did.
You walked to school.
Yes, we did. Mile and a half.
Yeah. And the stories coming from my mother, it lets me know that what we're doing and how it can be, and even though it may end up being worse in this world than what she even grew up in, we can survive. You know, you was talking to me how Grandpa would talk to you kids about having to, you know, cut back and having to tighten things up because of, you know.
He'd say, cut the fat. We're having a little rough this month. We didn't have as many eggs or milk or whatever. So it's a month we have to cut the fat. And that meant we were to realize that there wasn't going to be the luxuries or maybe the extras that they would do or give us. If they went to the grocery store and bring us home a sugar daddy or something. But we knew what cut the fat was. Kids don't know that this day and time.
That's right. And speaking of that, you know, you guys didn't get a lot. Toys, gifts, birthday, Christmas gifts.
No.
You didn't get a whole lot, did you?
No, we didn't. We got socks and shoes, an apple and an orange. And I heard all my life older people saying that, you know. It was the same way with us. Christmas was appreciated. It was a thing we looked forward to because it was things we needed. And when we opened it, saw what we had, we'd have to jump up and go put it on, show it off at school. It wasn't a thing that, don't we have any more? Is this all? It wasn't. It was never that way. We appreciated what we had.
Yeah, and you didn't get a lot of toys.
No.
How many dolls did you say you had your
I
entire
had
childhood?
2 dolls grown up, and I still have them. And the year that my sister passed away of a brain tumor, she was 10. Mother and Daddy went to Mercy Hospital, Kansas City, and they passed a store, and they saw 3 dolls. They were they stood up tall. One was a blonde, and two blondes and a brunette. And that was our Christmas that year that my sister passed away. She didn't get her doll, but he laid them on butcher paper, white butcher paper, in the kitchen, because they didn't have a tree, because they was going back and forth to Kansas City. And he told us to come in the kitchen and pick out the doll you want. And I picked out mine, and they picked out theirs, just like we knew that, you know. And then the next year, we couldn't have a Christmas, and they told us we wouldn't have a Christmas. But we went in on Christmas morning, and on a blanket was 3 dolls. And I had another sister who was younger than me, and there was her doll, my doll, and my sister's doll. She's a year older than I am. And they were dressed in wedding dresses. So pretty. And we played with them for a couple of hours, and Mom come in and said, "How'd you like your dolls?" We loved them. She said, "Well, that was the dolls I had last year." These are brides. Now we were young, 4 or 5 years old. But I thought that was pretty unique, and I never got rid of the doll. I never got rid of the doll wedding gown. And the next doll I had was from my sister and brother-in-law that lived in Iowa, came home for Christmas and brought us a doll. And it was beautiful, and I still have her. And it was times that you appreciated what you had. And I look back and see what I had, and we had so much more in the home than just gifts. And
yeah,
the kids understood the way it had to be, and there was no fussing, fighting. And Mom and Dad, I'm not saying they didn't fuss or get upset. They were under a lot of stress, but I never heard them fight. Never heard them get into it. But you could tell by when they were filling out the bills and things, there was so much stress on them. And those times I remember.
Yeah. Well, talking about you kids and stuff, what was life like when it came to working on the farm? I mean, how many were you guys helping out, and at a young age? You know, what kind of chores at different ages were you? I mean, was everyone?
I can remember when
you weren't sitting around watching TV and playing video games, obviously. So
no. When the corn came in, we had to get out and pull the corn. And the first year I did it, I was 6. And Daddy, I begged him to let me drive the tractor. So I get on the tractor and I drive it over a bale of hay. Got hung up. So I lost that job. But I still had to pull the corn and shuck it and do the things we had to do to feed our animals.
Yeah. And the boys, they were...
The boys was right beside Daddy doing everything that he did. They learned right beside him. And us girls was right beside Mom in the kitchen when it was time to come in and cook lunch or supper, whichever one. Yeah. We all got in and did it.
And you were taking care of your younger siblings. I remember you've talked about because Mom is kind of in the middle of the family. You're the middle one. And so you were helping take care of the younger kids at a pretty early age, weren't you?
Yeah, it was. They really didn't know who their mama was, because me and my sisters would take over when Mom was out in the field. And Mom stayed in the barn and the fields, and she just, in the gardens. She was a busy lady. Yeah.
And sewing things and just all kinds of stuff. I remember my grandma, she could sew anything, could quilts and clothes and everything. And that was some of the stuff that she had to do to make it. I think one of the, as much as the stories are so interesting for me to hear, and I've heard these stories my whole life. And I remember when my grandma was alive, of just listening to her stories of her childhood, and then also of my mother's childhood. And it's always interested me so much. But it also tells us that we can, we can survive on less. We live in a world that's so luxurious. I mean, think of the things that you have now, and we aren't wealthy at all. But the luxuries that we have, that back in your childhood, millionaires only lived that way. Right. A refrigerator full of food, and get to go out to eat occasionally. And, that was unheard of back then. And the point is that we can learn to live on less again. It's hard work. It's hard work, but we can learn to do for our own and to take care of ourselves.
It's true.
You know, that's what's so interesting to hear the stories of how you guys, you know, raised your own food and butchered on your own and hunted and fished. Grandpa did a lot of that. I mean, he was always hunting and fishing, and I remember as a kid them having that cellar, and that this was a different house than what she's talking about. Once they retired, they moved to a different place, but that cellar still was always full. Always full. Yeah.
They didn't have any kids at home.
Yeah.
But that cellar was full.
Yeah.
Because they knew if any of us hit hard times, in which they came to my house a few times and brought green beans, the different things, tomatoes, things that they had canned.
He always put out big gardens right up until they passed. Yeah. And then grandma, she was in her mid-90s when she died, and up until just a few years before she died, she was had a walker. Yeah. But she'd go out there and she'd hoe that garden, and she would pull weeds up with that hoe, and she kept eyes on that garden. Yeah, she'd still can food. She'd have her own pantry.
She could only peel things. She couldn't stand out and work at the stove or the sink. But we'd put a pan in her lap and she would peel apples and different things.
Yeah, and she didn't know how to cook out of a box. Everything was from scratch, you know. And that's another thing. So many people nowadays, they don't know how to cook from scratch, and they don't even know how to cook without a recipe book. You know, if they don't have their phone in front of them to look up a recipe or something, they don't know how to do it. And she just, I remember as a kid, it would amaze you. You'd go to grandma's house, and in 15 minutes time, she'd have a full meal on the table, you know, and it was all stuff that she would just, you know, come up with.
And we didn't have a problem with eating leftovers, because with 10 kids, there wasn't any leftovers.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah. And then that's another thing, and I've mentioned on this channel before that nowadays people look at children as almost a liability, you know, a cost. And while there certainly was a cost back then, the kids, your family, they were kind of an asset. They helped on the farm. They helped with the animals. They helped, especially the older ones, you know. So they were earning their keep, you know. They were earning their way, which is very different today, and we need to get back to that again.
Absolutely. And to this day, I still live real close to the way that I was raised. And it didn't always fit in the marriage. It was like, I read one time, you know, when you live poor, you get married and you use your oven to make toast. But you marry someone they demand a toaster in the house. And that's an example I always use. I always use the things that was there, available. There was no need to go buy something else. And if it broke, fix it. Yeah. If it was out of style, use it. Yeah. And I'm still that way.
Yeah. And I was born in the late 70s. And my childhood growing up in the 80s into the early 90s would sound like someone that grew up in probably the 50s or 60s, because we lived very, very simple lives compared to the people around us. You know, I remember for a long time, the only TV we had was just a little, like a 9-inch old black and white, you know, with the old dials, and it didn't really work. We couldn't hardly watch anything. We always had a garden. We were always working for other people that had a big garden, you know, people in the church that were farmers. We'd go out and help them, and that's how we'd get eggs or milk or vegetables and stuff. So, the point is, I think, and I wanted to have her on to tell these stories. I think they're very interesting, but that we don't have to get so caught up in this modern lifestyle either.
No.
You know, it's convenient, but it's also creates a dependency, because if you can't go to the grocery store, or you can't run down to the, you know, coffee shop or whatever, and you don't know how to take care of yourself, how are you going to survive? And you know, people that's lived like you lived, if things got really bad, a lot worse than they are, you know how to survive. You know that it's going to be tough, and you know that you can survive through that and not kind of lose your mind.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of people nowadays, if they were cut off from their grocery store or their Starbucks, they'd lose their mind.
That'd be it, yeah.
And you understand that, you know, it would be hard work, but it's survivable. Is there anything else that you can think of in your childhood on the farm, or anything that stood out, a story, or just something that others could learn from, use?
Well, one thing I learned, my dad was a giver. He wasn't a taker. And if you got my dad to take something, it was very rare. He was nice about it, but he always wanted to give. He didn't want to take. And I know God blessed our home that way, because like Travis said, he'd give the shirt off his back. We was at church one time, and I think he was a homeless man, came into the church, and we sat out in the car after church, and Dad was in the church with him, and Dad comes out in the man's shirt and pants and shoes. And Mom said, "What in the world, Thomas?" He said he never owned a suit or a new pair of shoes. And he said, so I gave him mine. And that's the kind of man he was, and that's the kind of kids he raised. If anyone needs anything, we're there to help. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying God blesses people that are willing to reach out to the poor and the homeless, you know. And we did. And the same, when I would get in a fix or something, there'd be something come up that I couldn't get, but somehow God supplied my need.
Right.
Always did.
Right. Yeah, and that's another big lesson through this, and we talk about on here of building community with each other, and you know, this part of this modern world is to not even know your neighbors. People don't even know who their neighbors are, and they don't help each other out. You know, if they need help, they go to the government. We need to bring that back, because at some point we may be forced to bring that back, because the world around us is going to fall apart. And so do it now and build those connections where you can help each other out. And you know, when, like I've said on here before, you may have your homestead good to go, but what happens if you fall and break your leg and you can't do anything on your homestead for weeks at a time? Who's gonna plant your garden if you're laid up in bed with a broken leg or something like that? And that's where the community comes in, to where they can help each other out, because that's kind of how it was back then. You know, in these small farm communities, people would come together and help you put out corn, or help you harvest it, or you know, if something broke down, they'd come over and help. You know.
Right. The summer I carried you, I put up over 300 jars of food, and it was just me and my husband. But one time, my youngest sister, Dad and Mom just always took groceries, took milk, took bread to them constantly. So I was getting kind of, I guess, jealous. And I said to Dad, I said, why do you guys, you know, just go to her house and give her all this stuff every month and everything? And he said, sis, we don't have to worry about you. He said, we see how you live, and you could make it through a depression and never know it was there. He said, because you know the things to survive with. And I do. And to this day, my sisters are very city-fied. But he can tell you, if there's anything to do on the farm, I can get right in there with you. And if you're going to clean squirrels or rabbits, I'm right there with him.
It doesn't bother her a bit. You know, manure, blood, it doesn't bother her. The last summer when we were butchering our chickens, she was right here with us. She was showing the kids how to butcher chickens. She can. There's not really anything around here that Mama can't do, other than just the brute strength of it. But, well, we've gone probably as long as we decided we were gonna go on this video. So, thank you so much. I'm sure that many of you enjoyed this, part of the entertainment of just the stories, but I hope that you've learned from it, because this way of life, I mentioned like Little House on the Prairie, because that's something that everyone knows what that is, I think. But it doesn't have to go that far back to find a way that people were living that way, at least in some part. And so it shows that even in modern times, we can survive a lot more than what we think we can on just living off the land. And we need to revitalize that old knowledge, that old wisdom, because these younger kids, they just don't know it. They have no clue. They
won't survive.
They won't survive because they don't know how. They have no survival instincts. They don't know how to go out and plant a garden or butcher a sheep or anything like that. So thank you again for being on here.
I enjoyed it.
And I'm sure many of you did. Thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.
God bless you.